If you're looking for a cheap, easy, and totally lazy way to start seeds, this is the way to do it. I am a self-proclaimed lazy gardener. I came across winter sowing last year and tried it for the very first time and found it so simple and easy that this lazy gardener is not going back. I'm especially looking for easy things this time of year because I'm expecting a baby in a few months and I need something that pretty much takes care of itself, and that is what winter sowing is. So in today's video, I'm showing you how to create these miniature greenhouses and what seeds you can exactly plant in them and how to go about doing this and answer all your questions. What you're going to look for with your jugs are these somewhat transparent jugs, ones that are completely opaque where you can't really see inside at all. Those won't work because you need the sunlight to go in. If anything but water was in your jug, make sure that you rinse it, scrub it out really good, shake it up really good. You don't want any milk residue or anything like that. Now, if you're thinking, I don't have these kind of jugs around the place, neither do I. So what I did is I went to a local coffee shop and I said, hey, for the next, couple of weeks, save all your milk jugs for me. And they did, and now I have a surplus of them. And it's great because these would have gone to the dump anyway, and now they're getting a second use, maybe a third or fourth, however many times I can reuse them. The next thing you're going to need is some really good soil. Now, I don't recommend using seed starting mix. I recommend using a good potting soil. And the reason for this is the seeds are going to be staying in these jugs for anywhere from a month to 3 months, and they need nutrition. Seed starting mix does not have any nutrition and it's basically sterile. So what I look for is a good potting mix. My personal favorite is from Fox Farm, and I can link that down below. And then I mixed in some worm castings as well. So this is going to be very nutritious for my plants over the next few months. Okay, I have a little helper with me. This is my son Liam. He's gonna help me show you how this is done. A couple other things you're going to need is some duct tape for taping up these jugs. You're going to need something to cut the jugs with. I've seen people use anywhere from scissors to a box cutter, anything that will cut them. I also recommend some labels and a pencil, and also I like this permanent marker that's actually specifically meant for the garden. It won't wash away. And of course, you're going to want your seeds. Let's start by getting our winter sowing jug ready. These I already have done, you can see. First of all, we do not want this cap. We want the water, first it could be rain or snow, we want it to be able to get into your jug. The next step we're going to do is create some drainage holes along the bottom. Personally, I have just found punching it with this box cutter knife here works pretty darn well. I always do 4 along the bottom. Some people will use a drill for this with good success. I tried that, but I'm not as good with the drill as someone else. I just found this to work. And because I get a lot of rain here, I also add some about 1 inch above the base. You don't have to do this if you tend to live in a very dry climate, but because I live in the PNW, we get a lot of rain. I want to make sure that my plants do not drown. Next, I'm going to start cutting. Usually I start about the handle and I cut all the way around till I meet the handle on this side. I like to leave a bit of a hinge. I find that easier to work with. The first few times I do this, it's kind of sloppy, and then as I do it more and more, I get pretty good at this. All right, not too bad. There we go. You see I have a hinge here. I have my drainage holes along the bottom. And when we're done sowing seeds, we're gonna be shut in this here. So here is our final jug. You can see how easy that was. It takes a little practice, but after a while you get pretty fast at it. Now we're going to pre-moisten our soil mix. And the reason for this is we want our seeds to have immediate contact with wet soil. And also, that way if it doesn't rain for a few days, my seeds have some water to get started. Okay, can you mix that up for me, bud? You want your soil mix to be very wet to the touch, but when you squeeze it, you're not pouring water from your hand, if that makes sense. While Liam is mixing up the soil, I'm gonna just show you a couple of the things I'm planting today. I am starting some lettuces, different kinds. I have Jericho lettuce, a Merlot, and a 4 Seasons lettuce. I'm also starting 2 different kinds of Swiss chard as well.
I did it!
Thank you, sweetie. And then I'm starting a whole mix of pansies and violets. I did this last year and they were so beautiful just scattered around my garden. So these do well with a little bit of a cold spell before they germinate. So this is the perfect time to be planting them. Typically you want to be starting your winter sowing in your coldest month. For a lot of people that's February. I do most of my winter sowing late January all the way through March. As long as your seeds have not germinated, you do not have to worry if your temperatures drop freezing temperatures. No worries, as long as your seeds have not germinated. Once they have germinated, you will probably want to cover them if it gets much below freezing. And usually for me, once I lay out my jugs, I might just cover them with a sheet if needed. Think about all the flowers that you might plant in your garden, and they cast their seeds in the late summer and fall. And then next season, suddenly you're finding all these flowers all over the place. Just imagine those seeds, how they went through the winter, and they don't choose to germinate until the temperature is optimal for them. We're doing the exact same thing with this winter sowing method. We are just doing it in a more controlled environment. When your seed is planted, it will not sprout until it gets to the right temperature consistently for that seed. That is why I don't have to worry about timing things just right so many weeks before the transplant date. I just try to plant all these seeds within February and March, and they will germinate when the temperature is right. You don't have to worry about grow lights because the sun does the job for you. And if you live in an area that gets a lot of snow and rain, that will provide enough moisture for your seeds that you don't even have to water them most of the time. So this soil mixture is perfect. It's nice and moist, but when I squeeze it, I'm not dripping a bunch of water from my hand. Oh, I'm gonna fill all these jugs with soil because they're just flying away. We're gonna fill these jugs almost to the top of this layer right here. Go ahead. You want your soil to be packed in lightly. Make sure not to press it too much. You also don't want there to be a lot of air pockets. You gonna check on the chickens? Okay. That's starting to sprinkle a little bit. Let's hope it doesn't start pouring. If you get a lot of snow, in fact, it can be really helpful to insulate your plants. So if your jugs are completely covered in snow for the next month or so, they will actually stay a little bit warmer, believe it or not, because that snow acts as an insulator. And as long as you leave that cap off the top of the jug, the snow will be able to get in there and keep your seedlings watered. We had a bit of rain hit us and I had to take a quick break, but I am back to sow my seeds in these jugs. So all of these jugs have been filled with soil already, pre-moistened. Now it is time to plant our seeds. But before I do that, I'm actually going to label inside the jug. Last year, I realized that the best method for labeling was to put a label inside the jug and on the outside. And the reason for putting it on the inside is not necessary, but it's nice because when I plant them, I can just take out that label and put it with the plants. And just in case your label on the outside disintegrates or something happens with the weather, you got the label on the inside. So this is my personal favorite. I label both. A question I get a lot of is, what can I plant in winter sowing jugs? It's a difficult one to answer because, well, it's not difficult. You can technically plant everything that is not direct sow in winter sowing jugs. When I say direct sow, I mean something that you plant directly into your garden. Things like carrots, beets, those are best sown as by seed into your garden where you want it, rather than transplanting it later, because things that have a taproot like carrots, they get easily damaged in the process of transplanting them from indoor sowing or these into the garden. So some of those, and you look on the back of your seed packet, most of the time it will tell you what's recommended, if they want you to sow it directly in the garden or if they want you to start it indoors. But for things that you can, it can go either way. They say you can sow it directly in the garden, you can sow it indoors early if you want a head start, or it says only to start indoors. Those are all great to use in your winter sowing jugs. Now, there is a caveat. The things that do the best, I have found personally, in the winter sowing jugs are things that are already cool season crops, like for instance, the spinach, Swiss chard, kale, any of your broccolis and cabbages, lettuces, all of those do fantastic. They do phenomenal in these winter sowing jugs. Another one are flowers, especially wildflowers that need a bit of a stratification period, meaning they need a bit of cold before they germinate. All of those do fantastic in these jugs as well. Any hardy annuals or perennials also do well in these jugs. Another one is herbs. I did a lot of basil, cilantro, I did a lot of those herbs in these, and they did fantastic. Depending on your growing season, you can try planting things like your squashes, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, the things that do well with heat. If you have a long enough growing season, you can certainly try doing them in winter sowing jugs. My season is not long enough. I tested it out, and the ones that did okay were some squash and cucumbers, just because they're such fast germinators. Things like tomatoes, even though I tried it, by time it was the time of year to plant them, move them from the winter sowing jug into my garden, they were so tiny because my springs are very cool here. That being said, if you have a very long growing season, you have warm springs, hot summers, you can certainly try and see if those warm season crops will do fine in your area. I'm going to put a list here of the things that I have found work well winter sowing, but do know that depending on your area, you could sow a lot more than this. So another thing people ask is, how many seeds should I plant in my winter sowing jug? Usually if it's small seeds, like most of these are very small seeds, you can plant anywhere from 6 to a pretty good pinch, which is quite a few seeds. They will be pretty close together, and when it is time to plant them in your garden, you're going to tease them apart to plant them. If you want to save some space, you can certainly mix, like I'm going to mix these two lettuces. You can also put a separation down the center and have two different kinds of cucumbers growing in this. Just make sure to label them if you really want to know what's what. Now comes our final steps, which is to tape our jug shut and label it on the outside. Duct tape is the best for this. This is probably the trickiest part for me, believe it or not, besides the cutting, to get it just perfect. And these jugs are a bit wet, so I'm guessing this isn't going to stick very well. Let me get a towel. Now remember, you don't necessarily have to water these very often, but I would recommend checking these now and then, especially if you live in a hot, dry climate. And the way to tell that your jugs need more water is if there is no condensation on the inside of the jug, and when you pick it up, it feels extra light. You'll know. Feel it now when there's wet soil in there, and you'll be able to tell when it's time to water. Okay, we are starting to rain again, so it's a P&W for you. I have done it several different ways. I'm gonna try just taking a big strip here and doing that. So you're just gonna tape it all the way around, overlap both sides. Yeah, this is not gonna stick, is it? This is what it looks like when it's all done. My tape is not sticking because my jugs are wet. So this might be best doing it inside or in like a garage. I'm gonna have to come out here and retape all these after the rain. It is really starting to rain. I am just going to tell you how I label the outside because this isn't gonna stick. I love using this painter's tape. It comes off really easily when you're done with it, but you label it on the outside, preferably with a marker that's specifically for outdoors. This is Luma color. It's for gardening. I just write down the date and what it is that's inside. That way I don't have to open it up to see what I labeled it as. So once you tape it all on the outside, then you're just gonna line these jugs up. Let's do that real quick. So I have put my jugs outside. I'm gonna have to retape these once it's not wet anymore. I can only get 2 done, but you can see I've taped it. I hopefully will put a label here once it dries. The cap is off, so that way my seeds will be able to get moisture. A couple other things to keep in mind when you are putting your jugs out is to put them ideally on the ground, because the ground will, especially when you get cold temperatures, the ground will provide a little more insulation versus if you have them on your deck, the cold air can come up underneath them and it just dry them out, cool them off. So having them on your soil or on grass like I have will help keep them insulated. And also I've always stacked them together. I'll have a picture here of how I just line them all up, and that prevents them from blowing over. My dogs don't bother them, my chickens don't bother them, but if you have issues with that, find a way to keep them away from those. Yeah, so that's basically it, and I'm just going to start checking these in probably about a month to see if they've started germinating. And once I see they're germinating, I'm going to keep an eye on them. If our temperatures get much below freezing, I'm going to cover them with just a sheet, just to keep them a little extra warm. When it comes time for planting them, you're going to, for some of these, you can plant them before your frost date, but if a seed packet tells you planted after your frost date, you're going to do that. You're going to keep them in their winter sowing jug until it's time to plant them outside. You don't necessarily need to harden these seedlings off. They are much hardier than your indoor seedlings are going to be. I do recommend though that maybe over 1 or 2 days that you start opening up the lid before it's time to plant them outside. And maybe if it's really hot out, put them in the shade so they don't get too hot and bake them these. And then when it's time to plant, these are going to be kind of thickly planted together. I just separate them, tease the roots apart, put them in the garden. They will kind of be a little wilty for maybe a couple hours to a day, and then they perk right up, and they did fantastic in my garden. I was surprised by how well they did. All right, I'm gonna have to end this video because it is starting to actually rain, but I hope that this was helpful. I know there's probably still a few more questions, but I hope that you'll give this a try. This has been such a game changer for me, especially with a baby on the way. Be sure to give this video a like and a thumbs up, and subscribe. Thanks for watching today. Go out and grow something. God bless. Go away.